My name is Camille, and for as long as I could remember, my primary function was to be beautiful and silent. If you've ever felt like a decoration in your own life, if you've ever had your sharpest thoughts and biggest dreams smoothed over and ignored, then you know a fraction of what my world was like. He thought my greatest skill was coordinating my handbag with my shoes. He believed my mind was a beautiful, empty room, furnished only with thoughts of hemlines and dinner party menus. In 10 minutes, he was going to walk into this very boardroom and offer me a 9-figure sum for the one thing I built in the dark while he slept, and he had absolutely no idea it was me. The man I was about to ruin was my husband, or at least, he used to be. Before I tell you exactly how I went from being his +1 to his biggest and most feared competitor, I'd love to know where in the world you're listening from today. Drop your city or country in the comments below. It's always so incredible to see how far these stories travel. And if you've ever been underestimated, if someone has ever looked right through you and dismissed your potential, do me a favor and hit that like button. It helps more than you know. And for all of you who are new here, make sure you subscribe, because this is a community for people who know what it's like to have to fight for your own voice. My life with Richard Sterling was a masterpiece of modern architecture and emotional emptiness. We lived in a sprawling, minimalist mansion in Palo Alto, a house of glass and white marble that felt more like a museum than a home. It had panoramic views of the valley, but the only thing I ever felt I was looking at was the reflection of my own gilded cage. Every surface was cold and hard to the touch, a perfect metaphor for the man who owned it. Richard was the CEO of Synaptic Corp, a software giant that had made him a king in Silicon Valley. He was brilliant, charismatic, and utterly ruthless, both in the boardroom and, as I would learn, in our marriage. I was his wife, which in our circle was a job title. It meant I was the curator of our perfect life, managing the staff, planning the flawless dinner parties where billion-dollar deals were seated, and chairing the right charity committees. My primary role, however, was to be an asset. Young, beautiful, well-dressed, and, most importantly, quiet. I was the living proof that Richard Sterling could afford the very best of everything, including a wife who looked like she'd been custom-made to accessorize his success. It's a funny thing, memory. It can play tricks on you, soften the edges of cruelty, or make you question if things were ever really as bad as you remember. I sometimes try to recall the man I first met, the one I fell in love with. There were glimpses in the beginning of someone else. I met Richard in my final year of college. I was finishing my degree in computer science, top of my class, with a passion for logic and elegant code that I had inherited from my late father, an aerospace engineer who taught me BASIC when I was 9. Richard was a guest lecturer, a rising star who had just sold his first startup. He was dazzling. He talked about technology not as a business, but as poetry, as a way to reshape the world. After his lecture, I stayed behind to ask a question about his data compression algorithm. He was surprised, then intrigued. He looked at me, truly looked at me, and saw my mind before he saw my face. We talked for 2 hours that day, and for the first year it was electric. He loved my intellect. We'd stay up late debating the ethics of artificial intelligence or sketching out theoretical app designs on cocktail napkins. He told me my mind was the most beautiful thing about me. I believed him. I gave up a promising job offer from a major tech firm to move with him to California to support his dream of building Synaptic Corp from the ground up. I believed we were building it together. But success, especially the intoxicating, hyper-masculine success of Silicon Valley, is a corrosive agent. It ate away at the man I knew, replacing him with a caricature. The more Synaptic grew, the more Richard's world became a bubble of yes-men, sycophants, and other tech brothers who saw women as either employees to be managed or ornaments to be acquired. Slowly, imperceptibly at first, my role shifted. My opinions on tech became cute. My insights were met with a patronizing pat on the head. The late-night debates were replaced by him monologuing about his genius, expecting only my rapt adoration. He began to rewrite our history, our narrative. I wasn't his intellectual partner anymore. I was the pretty girl he'd rescued from a boring academic life. He was Pygmalion, and I was his Galatea, a statue he had brought to life and taught how to behave in his glittering world. The daily cuts were small, almost too small to protest without sounding hysterical or ungrateful. It was the way he'd explain the most basic functions of his own company's software to me at dinner parties, using a slow, deliberate tone as if I were a child. "You see, honey, the cloud isn't actually a cloud in the sky," he'd say, and his friends would chuckle into their expensive wine. It was the way he'd hand me his credit card and say, "Why don't you go buy yourself something nice?" Whenever I tried to bring up a serious topic, a conversational tranquilizer dart designed to numb my mind and send me back to my designated playpen, the luxury boutiques of Stanford Shopping Center. I remember one evening with painful clarity. We were at a barbecue at the home of his chief technology officer, a man named Gavin, who had all of Richard's arrogance but none of his charm. I'd just read a fascinating white paper on a new decentralized network protocol, and I was buzzing with ideas. I found Richard and Gavin by the ridiculously oversized outdoor kitchen, talking about a new project. I waited for a pause, and then, naively, I jumped in. "That reminds me of that new paper on Tangle," I began. "The way they're approaching distributed ledgers without the blockchain overhead could solve the scaling issues you're talking about." The silence that followed was heavy and immediate. Gavin smirked, a cruel little twist of his lips. Richard just stared at me for a long moment, a look of profound disappointment on his face, as if I had just committed a major social faux pas. Then he laughed. It wasn't a kind laugh. It was a sharp, dismissive bark meant to put me back in my place. "Babe," he said, draping a heavy arm around my shoulders. "Listen to you, it's adorable. You've been reading my magazines again." He turned to Gavin, a conspiratorial grin on his face. "She's a quick study. Last week she almost figured out how to work the new espresso machine all by herself." He squeezed my shoulder. "Leave the tech talk to us, sweetheart. Go see if Melinda needs help with the canapes." I felt the blood rush to my face, a hot tide of shame and fury. I looked at Gavin, who was openly snickering. I looked at Richard, my husband, who was looking at me not with love, but with the weary indulgence of a parent whose child has just interrupted an important adult conversation. I didn't say a word. I just turned and walked away, the sound of their laughter following me across the perfectly manicured lawn. That night, something inside me fractured. The part of me that was still trying to be his partner, that was still hoping he would see me again, just gave up. I realized he hadn't just forgotten who I was. He had actively and deliberately erased her. In his mind, the Camille who coded, the Camille who dreamed of algorithms, had never existed. That night, I didn't cry. The hurt was too deep for tears. It was a cold, hollow ache in my chest. I went into my cavernous walk-in closet, a room larger than my first apartment. It was filled with hundreds of thousands of dollars worth of clothes, shoes, and handbags I'd barely even liked. They were a costume, the uniform for the role he had cast me in. I looked at my reflection in the floor-to-ceiling mirror. The woman looking back at me was a stranger. Her eyes were empty. I felt like a ghost haunting someone else's life. And in that moment, a new feeling began to bloom in the cold, empty space inside me. It wasn't anger, not yet. It was determination. A quiet, vicious resolve. If he wanted me to be a doll, an ornament, fine. I would play the part. But the dolls he didn't know about, the ones I kept in the back of my mind, were about to start working. The idea for the app came from the sheer, crushing pointlessness of my own schedule. My life was a whirlwind of activity with zero productivity. I had calendars for social engagements, reminders for his dry cleaning, lists for household stocking, databases for dinner party guest preferences, and their myriad allergies. I was managing a complex system with no meaningful output. It was a life of 1,000 tiny, urgent, and ultimately meaningless tasks. What if I thought there was a tool that could not just manage tasks, but understand them? A tool that could learn a user's workflow, anticipate their needs, and proactively organize their entire digital life, not just their calendar. An AI that could cut through the noise and find the signal, that could manage the mundane so you could focus on the meaningful. It was the kind of elegant, powerful solution that Synaptic Corp, with its bloated, clumsy software suites, could only dream of building. So I began. I used the shopping money he so carelessly gave me to buy a burner laptop, a powerful machine that he would never see. I set up encrypted hard drives and used a VPN routed through 3 different countries. I became a creature of the night. After he would come home, late and drunk on his own success, and pass out in our cold, sterile bedroom, I would slip away to my dressing room. That vast, soundproofed closet became my secret laboratory. I'd sit on a silk ottoman, surrounded by stilettos and designer bags, and I would code. The muscle memory came back faster than I expected. The late nights I had spent in the university computer lab, fueled by cheap coffee and the thrill of creation, came flooding back. The logic, the structure, the pure, clean satisfaction of building something from nothing. It was like finding a part of my soul I thought had died. The world would shrink down to the glowing screen and the click-clack of the keyboard. 4 hours, I wasn't Mrs. Richard Sterling, the pretty accessory. I was Camille, the architect. I was building my own world, one line of code at a time. It was the only place I felt real. The paranoia was constant. I lived in fear of being discovered. My heart would hammer in my chest every time he stirred in his sleep. I had elaborate protocols for hiding my work in an instant. The laptop would slide into a hidden compartment I'd fashioned inside a large, empty hatbox. The browser history would be instantly wiped and replaced with the websites for Neiman Marcus and Saks Fifth Avenue. I became an expert in subterfuge. My life was a masterclass in compartmentalization. By day, I was the smiling, serene trophy wife, discussing flower arrangements and summer travel plans. By night, I was the phantom coder, building a piece of software so revolutionary I knew it could change everything. There was a close call once, a moment that nearly ended it all. It was around 3 in the morning. I was deep in a particularly complex part of the AI's learning module, a problem that had vexed me for weeks. I had finally had a breakthrough, and my fingers were flying across the keyboard, a frantic, triumphant dance. I was so engrossed, I didn't hear the bedroom door open. I didn't hear his footsteps on the plush carpet. The first I knew of his presence was his voice, thick with sleep, right behind me. "What are you still doing up?" Adrenaline, cold and sharp, flooded my system. I slammed the laptop shut so fast it made a loud crack. My heart felt like it was going to explode out of my chest. I spun around on the ottoman, my face a mask of what I hoped was sleepy surprise. "Richard, you scared me." He was squinting in the soft light of the dressing room, his hair a mess. "It's 3:30. I woke up and you were gone." His eyes fell to the closed laptop in my lap. "What are you doing?" My mind raced, frantically searching for a plausible lie. My cover story, the one I had rehearsed 1,000 times, came to my lips. "I couldn't sleep," I said, forcing a little yawn. "I was just doing some shopping. There's a big sale at Bergdorf's tomorrow and I wanted to get a head start. You know how it is." I gave him a weak, hopefully charming smile. He stared at the laptop, then at me. For a terrifying second, I was sure he knew. I saw a flicker of suspicion in his eyes. He reached out and put his hand on the laptop, as if he was going to open it. My blood ran cold. "This is it," I thought. "It's over. Let me see," he said, his voice flat. I held my breath. My entire secret world was about to come crashing down. But then, as his fingers touched the lid, he seemed to have another thought. He looked around the room, at the endless racks of clothes, the shelves of shoes, the purses arranged like museum pieces. He sighed, a sound of weary resignation. He dropped his hand. "A sale, huh?" he said, the suspicion in his eyes replaced by the familiar, patronizing amusement. "Of course. My little night owl. Can't let a bargain get away." He shook his head, a small smile playing on his lips. He had looked at the evidence, but his prejudice was stronger. He simply couldn't conceive of a reality where I would be doing anything other than what he expected me to be doing. He saw what he wanted to see, his pretty, shopping-obsessed wife. "Come back to bed, honey," he said, turning to leave. "Don't stay up all night spending my money." He chuckled as he walked out of the room. I sat there for a long time, my body trembling with the leftover adrenaline. He hadn't seen. He hadn't seen because he was incapable of seeing. And in that moment, I knew with absolute certainty that I was going to succeed. His blindness was my greatest asset. His condescension was my shield. He had created the perfect conditions for his own downfall. 2 years. For 2 years, I lived that double life. The app, which I had named Nexus, grew from a concept into a powerful, functional prototype. It was beautiful, intuitive, and smarter than anything on the market. It was my secret, my baby. My proof that I was still in here. I was just waiting. I didn't know what for, but I knew a moment was coming that would force my hand. And then it came. It was a Tuesday night. Richard was hosting a dinner party for Marcus Thorne, a legendary and notoriously difficult venture capitalist Richard was desperate to get into business with. The dinner was at a Michelin-starred restaurant in San Francisco that had a 3-month waiting list. The table was filled with the usual suspects, other tech CEOs, their own trophy wives who spoke only to each other in hushed tones, and a few obsequious VPs from Synaptic. The entire evening was a performance, with Richard as the star. He was charming, he was witty, he held court with practiced ease. I did my part. I wore a stunning backless silk dress in a shade of blue that matched my eyes. I smiled, I nodded, I made sure everyone's glass was full. I was the perfect hostess, seen and not heard. Towards the end of the main course, Marcus Thorne, a man with cold, calculating eyes, turned to me. It was the first time anyone had addressed me directly all evening, other than to ask for the salt. "And what about you, Camille?" he asked, his voice smooth as silk. "What do you do to keep busy while this one is out conquering the world?" It wasn't a kind question. It was a test. A way of sizing up Richard's portfolio, right down to his wife. The table fell silent. All eyes were on me. I felt a familiar flush of anxiety. Richard, sensing my discomfort and clearly worried I might say something that would embarrass him, jumped in. He laughed that big, booming laugh of his and placed a hand possessively on my arm. "Oh, Camille is a master of logistics," he said, his smile not reaching his eyes. He leaned in towards Marcus Thorne, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial, man-to-man tone. "Her most complex algorithm is her shoe shopping habit." The men at the table erupted in laughter. A loud, boisterous, backslapping wave of ridicule. Even Marcus Thorne cracked a thin, reptilian smile. I just sat there. The sound of their laughter seemed to echo in the suddenly cavernous room. It wasn't just the words. It was the public nature of it. The way he had so casually, so effortlessly, dismissed my entire being in front of these powerful men to score a point. He had taken the last tiny shred of my identity that I held onto in public and ground it into dust under his heel. He didn't just think I was a simple-minded shopper. He was proud of it. It was a selling point. I looked at him. I looked at my husband, laughing with these other men at my expense. And in that instant, everything became crystal clear. The fog of years of hurt and compromise and self-doubt just evaporated. The fracture from that night at the barbecue turned into a clean, decisive break. I felt nothing. Not anger, not sadness. Just a profound, liberating emptiness. The love I had once felt for him, the loyalty, the shared history, it all withered and died in that moment, under the heat of their condescending laughter. I looked at him and I didn't see my husband. I saw an obstacle. The car ride home was silent. He was drunk and pleased with himself, humming under his breath. He probably thought I was angry about the joke. He had no idea. He had no idea he was sitting next to a stranger. He had no idea that he had just handed me the one thing I was waiting for, a reason. Not just to leave him, but to destroy him. The next morning I was gone. He left for his morning run at 5:30 a.m., as he always did, a creature of rigid habit. That was all the time I needed. I didn't pack the couture gowns or the diamond earrings. I didn't take the art or the furniture. I walked out of that marble mausoleum with one small suitcase. In it were a few changes of simple clothes, my father's old engineering textbooks, and every penny I had in a premarital bank account he never knew existed. And, of course, the burner laptop. I walked through the house one last time, a ghost leaving her haunting grounds. On the vast, cold marble island in the center of the kitchen, I placed my 2-carat diamond wedding ring. Next to it, I left a single folded piece of notepaper. On it, I had written just 10 words. "I've gone to work on a more complex algorithm." Then I walked out the door and never looked back. The first few weeks were a brutal shock to the system. I went from a life of limitless, frictionless ease to a tiny, third-floor walk-up apartment in a gritty part of San Jose that smelled perpetually of garlic and old carpets. The silence was the loudest thing. For years, My life had been filled with the noise of staff, of events, of Richard's booming voice. Now, the only sound was the hum of my laptop and the frantic beating of my own heart. There were moments of sheer, paralyzing terror. I would wake up in the middle of the night, convinced I had made a terrible mistake. I had thrown away a life of security and comfort for a half-finished piece of code and a vague notion of revenge. Richard, of course, reacted predictably. The first day, there were a dozen angry, confused texts. "What is this?" "A joke." Then came the voicemails, a torrent of rage and wounded pride. He accused me of embarrassing him, of being hysterical, of throwing a childish tantrum over a little joke. He never once asked if I was okay. He never once considered he had done anything wrong. His final message, which I saved, was dripping with contempt. "Fine. Go play your little game. You'll come crawling back in a week when you realize you can't survive without my credit card." That message became my fuel. I knew I couldn't do it alone. I needed a partner, an ally. I needed a shark. I thought of my old friend from college, Sarah Jenkins. We had been roommates, two nerds in a sea of sorority girls. While I had been seduced by Richard's world, Sarah had gone to law school and become one of the sharpest corporate lawyers in the Bay Area. We hadn't spoken in years. My new life hadn't had room for old, genuine friendships. I found her number and called her, my hand trembling. We met at a dive bar, the kind of place Richard wouldn't be caught dead in. I told her everything, the whole sordid story, from the promising beginning to the humiliating end. She listened patiently, her expression growing harder and more furious with every detail I shared. When I finished, she was silent for a full minute, just staring into her beer. Then she looked at me, her eyes blazing. "That absolute son of a bitch," she said, her voice a low growl. "We are going to burn his empire to the ground." Sarah was a godsend. She was the first person in a decade who had looked at me and seen the person I used to be. She didn't see a trophy wife. She saw a brilliant coder with a world-class product. She became my legal counsel, my business partner, and my one-woman support system. She helped me set up a shell corporation, an LLC, to shield my identity. We called it Athena Innovations. On the official paperwork, the founder and CEO was listed only by their initials, AI. It was a little inside joke that made us both smile. Athena, the goddess of wisdom and warfare. It felt right. With Sarah handling the legal and business structure, I was free to focus on the app. I poured all my grief, my rage, and my hope into Nexus. For 6 months, I barely left my tiny apartment. I lived on instant noodles and coffee, working 18-hour days. The world outside ceased to exist. My entire universe was the architecture of my code. I debugged, I refined, I polished. I built a user interface that was so intuitive it felt like it was reading your mind. I perfected the core AI, the predictive engine that made Nexus so revolutionary. It wasn't just a productivity app anymore. It was a digital extension of its user's brain. In a moment of private, bitter irony, I named the predictive engine's source code Project Shoebox. It felt like reclaiming the insult, turning his derision into the very heart of my creation. There were dark days. Days when a critical bug would set me back weeks, when a server would crash, when I would look at my dwindling bank account and feel the cold grip of panic. In those moments, I would listen to Richard's last voicemail. "You'll come crawling back." And the fire would return. I would not crawl. I would fly. After 8 months of relentless work, it was ready for a closed beta. Through Sarah's network, we gave access to 100 trusted tech insiders, developers, and project managers, all under strict non-disclosure agreements. We didn't tell them who was behind it. We just let the product speak for itself. The feedback was electric. People were blown away. They called it a game changer, a paradigm shift. Whispers started to spread through the tech blogs and on private forums. What was this mysterious app, Nexus? And who was the brilliant, anonymous founder, AI? The secrecy only fueled the hype. The mystique was intoxicating. The beta's success gave us the leverage we needed to seek funding. This was the part one dreaded: pitching to venture capitalists. But Sarah devised a brilliant strategy. We would do it all remotely. I would remain anonymous. Sarah would be the public face, and I would be the voice on the conference call, my voice slightly modulated to protect my identity. We pitched to a dozen firms. Most were skeptical. They wanted to meet the founder, to kick the tires. They were uncomfortable investing millions in a ghost. The rejections were disheartening. But I had gotten used to people underestimating me. Then came Evelyn Reed. She was a partner at a boutique VC firm known for making bold, unconventional bets. She was a legend, a woman who had shattered glass ceilings in the boys' club of venture capital. She agreed to a virtual meeting. We presented the app, the metrics from the beta, the business plan. When we finished, there was a long pause. I could hear her breathing on the other end of the line. "The product is genius," she said finally, her voice crisp and decisive. "It's 5 years ahead of anything on the market. But the anonymity is an issue for my partners." My heart sank. Here it comes, I thought. No. However, she continued, and I held my breath. I didn't get where I am by following the rules. I'm more interested in the quality of the work than the identity of the worker. Tell AI that I don't care if they're a man, a woman, or a clever squirrel in a trench coat. The work speaks for itself. You have a deal. She agreed to lead our seed round, a $5 million investment that would allow us to scale, to hire a small team, and to prepare for a public launch. And she agreed to honor my request for anonymity. I cried after that phone call, for the first time since I'd left. They were tears of pure, unadulterated relief. Someone else believed. With Evelyn's backing, Athena Innovations came to life. We hired a small team of brilliant young coders who were thrilled by the mystique of our anonymous founder. We worked out of a modest co-working space, a far cry from the opulent campus of Synaptic Corporation. 6 months later, we launched Nexus to the public. It was an explosion. It went viral within 48 hours. The user adoption rate was unprecedented. We were the #1 productivity app in the world in less than a week. TechCrunch, Wired, The Wall Street Journal. They all ran massive stories, speculating wildly about the identity of the mysterious AI. Some thought it was a secret skunkworks project from a major tech giant. Others thought it was a famous reclusive developer making a comeback. No one, not in a million years, suspected it was the quiet, decorative wife of Richard Sterling. And then, the moment I had been dreaming of, the news reached Richard. I read about it in an industry newsletter. Synaptic Corp stock had taken a hit. Their flagship productivity suite, once a market leader, was now being called clunky, outdated, and pre-Nexus. There was a description of an all-hands meeting at Synaptic where Richard had reportedly been furious, demanding to know how they had been so completely blindsided by a no-name startup. He had tasked his entire R&D department with reverse engineering Nexus. They failed. The core AI was too sophisticated, too elegant. It was a black box of genius they couldn't crack. Soon, the acquisition offers started rolling in. Every major player in the tech world wanted to own Nexus. A bidding war began, driving the valuation of my little company into the stratosphere. Google, Microsoft, Oracle, they were all at the table. And then, as I knew he would, Richard entered the fray. Synaptic Corp, desperate to reclaim its dominance and humiliated by this upstart, became the most aggressive bidder. The irony was so thick, so deliciously perfect. It was almost overwhelming. The man who had mocked me for being too simple-minded to understand his world was now desperately trying to buy the world I had built in secret. He was leveraging the entire future of his company to acquire a product created in his own dressing room, born from his own condescension. The bidding war escalated over several weeks. It came down to 2 final contenders, a massive, soulless tech conglomerate and Synaptic Corporation. Richard's offer was obscene. A number so large it felt like fantasy. It was the highest bid. Sarah called me with the news. "He's offering 9 figures, Camille," she said, her voice a mix of awe and disgust. "But there's a condition. He's insisting on a final, in-person meeting with the founder before he signs the papers. He says he wants to look the genius in the eye and shake their hand." My blood ran cold. This was it. The final act. All the fear I had suppressed for the past year came rushing back. Could I do it? Could I face him? I thought about the woman in the mirror in the closet, the ghost. I thought about the sound of his laughter at that dinner party. I took a deep breath. Tell him yes, Sarah, I said, my voice steady. Tell him the founder would be delighted to meet him. The stage was set. The curtain was about to rise. The headquarters of Synaptic Corp was exactly as I remembered it, a monument to ego, built of steel and smoked glass, rising out of Silicon Valley like a dark, jagged tooth. It was designed to intimidate, to make anyone who entered feel small and insignificant. A year ago, I would have. But as I walked through the towering glass doors, I didn't feel small. I felt like I owned the place. I wasn't dressed in the soft silks and cashmeres Richard had chosen for me. I wore a bespoke power suit of dark charcoal wool, tailored to perfection. My hair was pulled back in a severe, elegant chignon. My only jewelry was a simple, modernist silver pin on my lapel, the logo of Athena Innovations. I was not Camille Sterling, the wife. I was AI, the founder. My lawyer and steadfast friend, Sarah, walked beside me, her expression a mask of professional calm that barely concealed her own giddy anticipation. A nervous, junior executive met us in the lobby, his eyes wide with a mixture of awe and terror. We were ushered into a silent, magnetically levitating elevator that whisked us to the top floor, to the main boardroom. The executive showed us in and then practically fled, as if the room itself were radioactive. The boardroom was Richard's sanctuary. One entire wall was a floor-to-ceiling window with a godlike view of the valley below. A massive, obsidian black table, polished to a mirror shine, dominated the space. It was a room designed for executions. I walked to the head of the table, the seat Richard always occupied, and stood there for a moment, looking out the window. Sarah came to stand beside me. "Ready for this?" she whispered, her voice tight with excitement. I took a deep, steadying breath, the air tasting of filtered, climate-controlled power. "I was born ready for this," I said, though my heart was hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. I just didn't know it until now. We sat down, not in the chairs designated for visitors, but on one side of the vast table as equals. And we waited. 5 minutes later, the door hissed open. Richard strode in, followed by his CFO, a nervous-looking man named David, and another man I recognized with a jolt of ice in my veins, Marcus Thorne, the investor from that fateful dinner party. Richard was in his element, radiating power and confidence. He was smiling, triumphant. He had won the bidding war. He was about to acquire the hottest property in tech and solidify his legacy. He didn't even look at us at first, speaking in a low, confident voice to his CFO. "Make sure the press release is queued up, David. I want it to go live the second the ink is dry." "Of course, Mr. Sterling," David mumbled. Richard finally turned his attention to his guests, his smile broadening. "Sarah, good to see you again," he said magnanimously. "So where is he? Where's the mystery man? Let's meet the genius." He swept his gaze past me, his eyes scanning the room for the brilliant, reclusive man he was about to meet. He looked behind the door. He glanced towards the credenza. His gaze passed over me 3 times, his brain actively refusing to process what it was seeing. I was just part of the scenery. A woman. Probably an assistant. Sarah allowed the silence to stretch for a delicious, agonizing moment. "Richard," she said, her voice as crisp and sharp as breaking glass. "You wanted to meet the founder and CEO of Athena Innovations." Richard's impatient gaze finally, truly, landed on me. And then it happened. It wasn't a sudden shock. It was a slow, cascading system failure. I watched his face as his mind struggled to reconcile the impossible. First, there was a flicker of confusion. What is Camille doing here? Then dismissal. This must be a mistake. She must be serving divorce papers, trying to embarrass me. His smile began to falter, the edges curling in like burnt paper. His eyes widened slightly. The confident posture, the arrogant tilt of his head, it all began to dissolve. His brain, the one he was so proud of, was short-circuiting in real time. The color drained from his face, leaving behind a pasty, sickly gray. The charismatic CEO evaporated, replaced by a slack-jawed, horrified man. I let him dangle in his silent, screaming disbelief for a few more seconds. Then, I leaned forward slightly and gave him a small, cool smile. "Hello, Richard," I said, my voice perfectly level. "It's been a while." He flinched as if I had struck him. He opened his mouth, but no sound came out. He just stared, his eyes wide with a dawning, multifaceted horror. He looked at me, at Sarah, and then his panicked gaze flew to Marcus Thorne. Marcus, the shark, was leaning back in his chair, a slow, predatory smile spreading across his face. He remembered the dinner party. He remembered the joke. He was watching the most spectacular, most ironic implosion he had ever witnessed, and he was savoring every second of it. Camille. Richard finally managed to croak, his voice a pathetic squeak. What is this? What are you doing here? He looked wildly around the room, as if expecting Ashton Kutcher to jump out from behind a plant. I believe you're here to sign the acquisition papers for my company, I said, my voice calm and clinical. I slid a sleek, leather-bound portfolio across the gleaming black table. It stopped directly in front of him. Although, I'm afraid there have been some changes to the terms. His mind was still reeling. Your company, he stammered. Athena. Eh? That's you. Yes, I said simply. The single word hung in the air like a death sentence. That one word confirmed it all. The lie of our marriage, his profound blindness, the sheer scale of his underestimation, and the totality of his defeat. He had been outmaneuvered, outsmarted, and beaten by the one person in the world he had considered his intellectual inferior. His pretty, thoughtless accessory. He finally broke. The confusion curdled into pure, sputtering rage. This is a trick, he snarled, slamming his hand on the table. This is some kind of elaborate revenge plot. It's not revenge, Richard, I said, my voice still unervingly calm. It's just business. Your offer was very generous. It created a wonderful sense of urgency in the market. I glanced at Marcus Thorne, who was now watching Richard with undisguised contempt. I'm sure Marcus, as a savvy investor, can appreciate a well-leveraged negotiation. Richard looked like he was going to be physically sick. He was humiliated, exposed, and emasculated in front of the very man he had tried so hard to impress. I opened my portfolio. As I said, the terms have changed. I continued in a crisp, all-business tone. Your bid for Athena was by far the highest. It established a new, much higher valuation for my company. A valuation so impressive, in fact, that yesterday afternoon, I closed a new round of Series B funding for $200 million, led by a consortium that Evelyn Reed put together. So, you see, I'm no longer interested in being acquired. The silence that followed was absolute. Richard stared at me, his face a mask of utter devastation. He had lost. But it was worse than that. His own desperate, arrogant bid was the very thing that had catapulted my company and me into the big leagues. He had personally financed my ultimate independence from him. I had used his own brute force against him, a perfect judo move in the world of corporate finance. I stood up, and Sarah rose with me. I smoothed down my suit jacket. I looked Richard directly in the eye. The rage was gone from his face, replaced by a hollow, defeated emptiness. He looked small. Thank you for your time, gentlemen, I said to the room at large. I started to walk towards the door, Sarah at my side. I paused with my hand on the handle and turned back to look at him one last time. Oh, and Richard, I said, a small, genuine smile finally touching my lips. There's one more thing. He looked up, a flicker of something in his dead eyes. I thought you'd like to know, I said, my voice light and conversational. The predictive AI at the core of Nexus, the part of the code that no one at Synaptic could crack? I named its source file the shoebox. I thought you'd appreciate the tribute. I saw the last bit of light die in his eyes. It was the final, perfect cut, a blade of pure irony, delivered with a smile. I turned and walked out of the room, Sarah right behind me. The heavy door clicked shut, sealing him inside the tomb of his own making, leaving him in the deafening silence of his spectacular failure. The moment the elevator doors closed, sealing us in our own private mirrored box, the facade I had so carefully maintained finally crumbled. A sound bubbled up from my chest, a strange, hysterical noise that was half laugh, half sob. Sarah looked at me, her own professional mask dissolving, and she started to laugh too. We clung to each other in that descending elevator, laughing and crying, the sheer overwhelming release of a year's worth of tension and fear and righteous fury pouring out of us. The shoebox, Sarah gasped, wiping tears from her eyes. Oh my God, Camille, that was savage. That was a work of art. We were still laughing when the doors opened onto the vast marble lobby, where we walked out into the bright California sunshine, leaving the dark tower and its broken king behind us. The story, as I knew it would, leaked. It was too delicious, too perfectly cinematic to remain a secret in a town that runs on gossip and schadenfreude. Within 24 hours, it was everywhere. TechCrunch ran the headline, "The Ghost in the Machine. Synaptic CEO's ex-wife revealed AS founder of rival Nexus." Wired went with something more poetic, "The algorithm he couldn't see." My face, a new professional headshot Sarah had insisted I take, was plastered next to Richard's stunned, pathetic expression, captured by a paparazzo as he left the Synaptic building that afternoon. The fallout for Richard was swift and brutal. He became a laughingstock, a meme, a cautionary tale whispered at every bar and coffee shop in the valley. His carefully constructed image of an infallible tech visionary was shattered forever. The narrative was just too powerful. The arrogant CEO brought down by the trophy wife he thought was too dumb to do anything but shop. Synaptic Corp's stock plummeted over 30% in 2 days. The board of directors, led by a newly energized Marcus Thorne who saw an opportunity for a hostile takeover, called an emergency meeting. 2 weeks after our meeting in the boardroom, Richard Sterling was forced to resign in disgrace from the company he had built. A few days after his ousting, I received a long, rambling email from him. It was a pathetic cocktail of self-pity, half-hearted apologies, and bitter accusations. He blamed the tech bro culture. He blamed Marcus Thorne. He blamed the stress of his job. He even tried to take credit for my success, suggesting that his support had given me the free time to dabble in my little project. He ended the email by begging me to make a public statement in his defense, to tell the world that it was all a misunderstanding. I read the entire pathetic screed, and I felt a brief, fleeting flicker of something that might have been pity. Here was the great man, the titan of industry, reduced to this. Then I remembered the sound of his laughter at that dinner party. I remembered the cold emptiness of his eyes. I moved the email to the trash folder and then emptied it, deleting him from my life for the final time. He no longer had any power over me. His words were just noise. In the weeks that followed, I was inundated with interview requests. I was the new celebrity of the tech world. I agreed to a few, carefully chosen ones. With Sarah's coaching, I learned to control the narrative. When reporters tried to frame it as a simple revenge story, I gently steered them away. This wasn't about him. This was about me. I talked about my passion for elegant code. I talked about the incredible team we were building at Athena. I talked about our vision for the future of productivity. I framed the story not as one of a woman scorned, but as one of an innovator who had to overcome obstacles, one of which just happened to be a dismissive husband. By refusing to center him in my story, I diminished him further. He wasn't the antagonist in my drama. He was a footnote in my biography. 2 months after the reveal, Sarah and I sat on the balcony of my new office, a bright, airy loft space in a converted warehouse, filled with plants and collaborative workspaces, the absolute antithesis of Synaptic's sterile headquarters. We were drinking champagne, not to celebrate Richard's downfall, but to celebrate Athena's new round of funding. You know, I said, looking out at the city skyline, for the longest time, I thought that success would mean seeing him humiliated. But that's not it. Sarah looked at me, curious. What is it then? She asked. I smiled, a real, peaceful smile. It's this, I said, gesturing to the vibrant office behind us, to the city lights twinkling ahead. It's not about tearing his world down. It's about finally, completely building my own. 2 years have passed since that day in the boardroom. Athena Innovations is no longer an upstart. We're a unicorn, a major player in the tech industry with a valuation in the billions. Nexus has become the gold standard, integrated into businesses and universities around the world. Last month, my face was on the cover of Forbes, not as part of a Women in Tech issue, but as Innovator of the Year. My life is full, not with meaningless social obligations, but with work that I love, with a team that I respect, and with a sense of purpose that I thought I had lost forever. I established a foundation to provide scholarships and mentorship for young women entering STEM fields, determined to ensure that the next generation of female innovators never has to hide their brilliance in a closet. I found that my happiness is not defined by revenge or by Richard's failure. It's defined by my own success and my own peace of mind. The anger has long since faded, replaced by a profound sense of gratitude. I'm grateful for his condescension, because it gave me the cover I needed to work. I'm grateful for his blindness, because it forced me to learn to see myself clearly. He thought he was trapping me in a gilded cage, but all he did was give me a quiet, comfortable place to forge the key. The greatest lesson I learned is that seeking validation from people who are committed to misunderstanding you is a fool's errand. The real victory wasn't in that boardroom. The real victory was in those long, lonely nights in the closet, when I chose to believe in myself for myself. I didn't need him to see me as brilliant. I just needed to see it in myself. So, if you've ever felt small or been put in a box, or had your dreams belittled, I hope my story shows you that the walls of that box can be the very place where you build your escape hatch. Sometimes, being underestimated is the greatest competitive advantage you can have. Thank you so much for joining me and for listening to my story today. I'd love to hear from you in the comments. Have you ever had an experience where being underestimated actually worked in your favor? Share your story below, because our collective experiences are what give us strength. Please don't forget to like this video if it resonated with you, and subscribe to the channel for more stories of overcoming and empowerment. I hope my journey can be a source of inspiration for you, a reminder that you are the author of your own story, and you can write any ending you choose. Thank you for listening.